Well, hello everyone. So today we're going to talk about some heavy stuff. As you know, the INFJ is sometimes considered in its most unhealthy versions a great candidate for covert narcissism. And I come across, this hypothesis or this accusation fairly often. Obviously, mostly from people who are not INFJ, but who maybe claim to have been victims of INFJs, who fall into that category. Sometimes it also comes from INFJs themselves who think that, yeah, to the extent that an INFJ can be a toxic person, which we know is possible. There's no type that is exempted from the possibility that they may in fact be toxic, So the idea is that the manifestation in the case of an INFJ is more likely to be covert narcissism, that's what you're going to be dealing with. And I just want to intervene on this. I want to contribute my view because it's not my experience. And as you understand, my experience is not just that of a regular INFJ man, so to speak. It's also the experience of someone who, through my work, through my YouTube channel, has been lucky to interact with a lot of INFJs on a lot of INFJ platforms, Discord servers, forums, and who's also been lucky enough to get exposed to a lot of sort of personal testimonies, okay? And my view is, of course, the point is not to deny that toxic INFJs exist. Because when we talk about toxic INFJs, what we're really talking about is toxic individuals who became toxic for X, Y, and Z reasons, who, if they were to take a test or were to be assessed by me or some other practitioner or expert, would get an INFJ typing. Now that's perfectly compatible. Like I said, there is no being one type that intrinsically and by essence safeguards you from the risk that you might develop some toxic behaviors, mechanisms, ways of being. It's just that covert narcissism is, of course it can happen, but I think if I guide you a little bit through what it actually means for psychologists and psychotherapists and psychoanalysts and so on and so forth, I think you will hopefully come to appreciate that might not capture the essence of INFJ unhealth, and that there's other ways, and perhaps some more common ways that the INFJ can be unhealthy, and not just unhealthy in terms of themselves, but toxic. Right? We're talking about toxic here. So what's always to be remembered when you're talking about narcissism and narcissistic dynamics is that narcissism has a goal, which is narcissistic supply, which means that a narcissist uses other people as objects for their narcissistic supply. Others are not really subjects, others are objects that are meant to supply them with narcissistic energy, because there's a hole in the self of the narcissist. And because there is a hole in the self of the narcissist, they constantly need this influx of like narcissistic reinforcement to kind of fill the gap. The hole is so big that the gap's never filled. But the narcissist is constantly engaged in this perpetual process of seeking to get narcissistic supply from other people. And what this translates into at the level of everyday experience, and when you're dealing with people like that, is that ultimately the goal of the narcissist is not manipulation. Manipulation is one means, right, among others, but it's one important means, certainly, by which the narcissist attains what their true goal is, the end, right, which is to be the center of attention. The narcissist needs to be the center of attention, needs to be the one who seizes, commandeers and seizes the central spot, and who gets his narcissistic supply or her narcissistic supply in that way. If the approach is more covert, then the narcissist will tend to guilt their significant other, will tend to always complain that they're unwell, will tend to complain that their significant other or the close friends or whatever are not really attending to their needs, not really understanding them. So in a sense, the covert narcissist has more of a depressive kind of outward behavior. Okay, that's what is meant. So there's an element of manipulation, but you're only a covert narcissist if your goal at the end of the day is that people focus on you. Okay. Now you have other forms of narcissists. I won't talk about the malignant narcissist, because for me, again, that doesn't really exist as a psychological category, and to me, like, difference between that and psychopathy is I don't really see it, to be honest. But you have the grandiose narcissist, right? And that's what the INFJ is supposed to not be. The grandiose narcissist is not covert. They think they're amazing, and they expect people to admire them for that. Okay. Now the grandiose narcissist is often associated with more extroverted types. Okay. But as we will see in a second, I don't think that's necessarily the case. And finally, you have a category that is not a category of narcissism per se. It's perversion. Someone who is perverse. Okay, perversion is also a mental illness, and it's not formalized as such in like diagnostic manuals, often like the DSM-5 and other ones. But like, perversion is a mental illness, and perversion has as its end goal something fundamentally different from narcissistic goals. The goal of perversion is not to be the center of attention. The goal of perversion is to subject the other to being objectified for the pleasure of control, mastery, and power. Okay? So in a sense, the pleasure of the perverse person is to compensate for what is, at the very basic, at the beginning, a castration anxiety, compensating for this inferiority in the face of the father, if you wanted to put it that way, by constantly seeking to recapture power, domination, and control with other people. And in this case, manipulation for its own sake is pursued, not for the purpose of being the center of attention. Okay? Now, why am I saying all these things? Because having encountered, I don't have a theory about all this, okay, but having interacted with a lot of INFJs, it seems to me that the toxic ones, and I have encountered a good few of them, obviously the more INFJs you interact with, the more likely it is that you'll come across some toxic ones. Still less than 1% of the INFJ population. Always keep this in mind. Point is not to say like INFJs are sick. We're talking about 1% or less than 1%. I have encountered just as many grandiose INFJ narcissists as I have encountered covert INFJ narcissists. In fact, covert INFJ narcissists I haven't encountered that often. I know they exist, but and in my private life, in the long sort of pretty distant past, I experienced that in a kind of direct way too. But if you feel like there is a guilting and a kind of always complaining, you're dealing with that. But INFJs can also be grandiose in the sense that they'll be more subtle, more discreet, and more tactful about how they articulate it. But they can also have this desire to be admired, which can also be connected with what I call the overblown ego ideal of the INFJ. Sometimes the one way of making your ego ideal exist and not crush you completely because you're faced with the reality of you not being able to match it because it's so overblown, is to try to find in other people the confirmation that your ego ideal about yourself is justified. And that can lead to grandiose narcissism. So it happens. But I think the more common one is really perversion. So I don't think that narcissism is the main INFJ issue. Perversion is manipulative, and the perverse person is narcissistic, like has narcissistic traits, but they're not like narcissists in the same sense, because what they enjoy is control, power, and domination. INFJs will enjoy this not by physically dominating another person or threatening them, but INFJs can find, again, we're talking about really disturbed INFJs. We're not talking about normal INFJs here, okay? But we're talking about the disturbed ones. It's much more likely that an INFJ who is disturbed will seek to use their function stack and their intelligence, if they happen to be intelligent, which is often the case with INFJs. It's much more likely that they'll be using that for the sake of puppeteering, of giving themselves the feeling like they're making people do what they want them to do, that people are under the influence even when they don't realize that, and for them to derive a perverse pleasure from that, never actually saying anything. Sometimes the manipulation is not even aiming at ending in a kind of destructive situation, but they enjoy this sense of, I might say behind their back whatever I want, but they're behaving exactly the way I want them to behave, and the way they think about me is completely indicative of the fact that, you know, they're under my spell, they're under my influence. That's perversion, and I think that's a compensation for often INFJs having felt disempowered when they were younger due to the fact they have quite a different kind of neurodevelopment than other types. I'm going to go into that in the future a bit more if you're interested, but I'll stop here. Don't forget, I've written 2 books on the INFJ. The Infinite Soul is my latest one, INFJ Life in the Modern World. Now, if you're a healthy INFJ, you're a bit terrified of the world because you think it's a scary place, this book shows you how you can be authentically yourself, and that's the key also to finding meaning, value, and purpose in your life. So you should get the Infinite Soul, as well as the prequel to the Infinite Soul, which is the Ecstatic Soul, a new look at the INFJ personality. Get this now, check the reviews, it's helped a lot of people like the other one, and that's the deepest investigation of the type you will find online, okay? The Ecstatic Soul. Finally, guys, don't forget that Patreon is the lifeblood of my channel. I cannot do it without you. If you support me on Patreon, the link is below. You can access a Discord server, bonus videos every 2 weeks, and other perks. It's really cool. And basically, you help me keep going with my channel, so I'd be very grateful. Okay, guys? Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.